Hello, welcome to another edition of Truth and Rhythm, brought to you by funkinstuff.net. This is the interview show that gets deep in the pocket with contemporary music's foremost masters of the groove. I'm your host, Scott Dr. Jakes Goldfine, and as always, I thank you very much for your continued interest and support of the show. You can see the video version at funkinstuff.net or on YouTube, the audio versions on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever you can find podcasts pretty much. I want to also give a shout out to the Funk Hall of Fame and Exhibition Center in Dayton, Ohio, of which I'm official funk ambassador. Keep the funk alive. Get more information by going to thefunkcenter.org. And also make sure you subscribe to the Funky Stuff channel on YouTube. Never miss a thing. For today's episode, I'm delighted to welcome to the Truth and Rhythm studio a man who was practically born with drumsticks in his hands, Mr. Charles Poogie Bell. Starting at a very young age.
Hey, what's up, Scott?
Maybe some Rattlers. I think you had drumsticks. At a very young age, by the early 1980s, he was off and running as one of the top session stage drummers in the business, ranging from hip-hop to R&B to jazz. Bell's credits include Don Blackman, the Force MDs, Johnny Kemp, Chaka Khan, Noel Pointer, Kirk Whalum, Erykah Badu, Vanessa Williams, Stanley Clarke, Victor Wooten, and a long-time recording relationship with Marcus Miller.
Yep.
In addition to that, since 2004, he's released 5 albums of his own and is presently working on another epic record. Poogie.
Ooh, hello.
Poogie, how are you, man?
I'm all right, Scott. I like that whole funk ambassador thing. I want to get one of those badges. I want to be a funk ambassador, too. You need to call those people up. I like that. Funk ambassador. Sounds very cool.
Yeah, you get to verify if it's funky or not.
There you go. Someone has to do it. It's a tough job, but somebody has to do it.
Yeah. So where are you coming to us from today?
Right now, I am in my basement in Pittsburgh at my house, where I spend probably way too much time. But it's my workspace. So I have a studio set up down here. I record drum tracks and vocals and horns and guitars and stuff. And I'm in here working on my next project. It's really strange. I started out, well, first of all, the last record I put out was called Exhibition Continues. So I did a record with more of a contemporary jazz kind of acoustic kind of record. And I had strings and it was very lush and stuff, but it was just something that I wanted to do. You know, my father was God bless him, was a jazz musician, but he also was classically trained. So I heard, strings and stuff in my house all the time. So when I started working on that last record, my father had just passed away. So, I was just feeling his influence. So, I think I think Exhibition Continues was a good record, but I fell prey to like a lot of things. That was veered away from what people know me for, or even I consider myself just to be a musician. But I signed to a new record company who didn't have all the stuff in place like they told me they had. So the record got lost in the sauce, right? And but if hindsight's 20/20, and it usually is, the record company messed up and they have apologized profusely. So I'm getting a lot more support for the current project that I'm working on, which is yet untitled. I was down in the dumps because the last record I thought was really good and it didn't do that well. So I was really like, wow, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm going to do. So this past summer, I was working at a place in Homewood, which is a very, very old Black community here in Pittsburgh, at the YMCA. And the Y, they have a program called the Lighthouse Program. It's run by a guy named James Brown, an unfortunate name for him because obvious reasons. But anyway, he was able to get the Heinz Endowment to give him $1 million, and he built $1 million recording studio. And so this past summer, he had a thing called the Startup Music Program, and it was basically, going to give young kids between like 14 to 18 music business 101 classes, right? And I was one of the mentors or teachers or whatever. But all the really kids, all they really care about is hip hop, right? All right. So anyway, I'm watching these kids work, and I'm watching them how they put these what they call beats, what I call small musical vignettes. But I'm watching them put these things together, and and one thing was prevalent. They kept going to this site called Splice, and I'm like, well, what is this, right? Oh, well, you know, this is a site where you can go and pick sounds, chords, guitar, any kind of sound in the world, and it might, somebody might play 2 bars, 1 bar, or just one beat or something, and they would take all these different things, call all these different things, and then turn them into one of their hip hop beats, right? And I went, wow, this is really kind of cool. And I said to myself, well, I wonder what would happen if I tried to use this site. What could I come up with? And so going from not knowing what to do, right? I found this site, and it's just like something turned on, right? And I felt like young again and stuff, right? And I started working on these songs. And at first it was a little, it was okay. But the more I did it, more and more I got really, I got good at it. And so I've come up with, if people want funk, right? This record is oozing with funk. So I mean, I have like really good jazz funk tunes. I have straight up and down R&B kind of funk tunes that kind of remind me of the period somewhere between 1997 to about 2000 or so, when things were still really kind of still had a little music going on. I got a little Afrobeat flavor going on. So I'm really, really, really excited about this new project. I don't have a name for it, but I'm really excited about this new project. Now here's the kicker, right? So I was over in Europe. I did a tour of Bratislava and Slovakia and Slovakia basically for about a week. At the end of that week, my record company is a German company, and it's called Leopard, and it's owned by a company called Delta Music, which is some big German conglomerate, right? Anyway, I go to Cologne to cut the drum tracks, right? So I show up, and the record company president, his name is Joachim Becker, and a very, very, very like a German version of who would he be a German version of? The guy who worked for Warner Brothers for a long time, whose name I can't remember right now, but if I said it, you would know who I'm talking about. He produced Yellow Jackets. He produced like Miles' record when he came to Warner Brothers. He's passed on, but my point is, Joachim is a real record guy, cut from that cloth of the Erdigans, or you know what I mean. He's one of those kind of guys. But he's busy. He's busy, doing this record, doing that record. So he hadn't had time to listen to my demos and stuff. He just knew I was coming to cut drums. So I get there, and pulls up. Says, wow, man, this is funky. This is great grooves, and this is amazing. So he said, well, how many songs do you have? I said, I think I got 22. He went, 22? What? And I said, well, look, man, we don't have to do all 22 songs. We could just pick 10 or 12 and, call it a day, And he was like, no, but they all sound so good. We got to put out 22. We got to put out all this stuff. I don't know how we're going to do it, but we got to do it. So in 3 days, over a 3-day period of time in the studio in Cologne, I cut 22 drum tracks, 3 takes each, right? And it was a hell of a feat, and putting this thing together is like,
My quick math says 66 takes.
Yes, exactly. That is correct. And so, but then you have to like go through all those takes and then find the best ones, or with the technologies, which ones you're going to put together and merge and so forth and so on. But in the midst of doing that, then, a lot of these samples, some of the samples on the music I'm keeping, but a lot of the stuff has been replaced by humans, right? So, reached out to my good friend Bobby Sparks, who plays with Snarky Puppy currently, but he had put out a great record last year called Schizophrenia. Crazy funky. If you haven't heard it, go on Spotify and find Bobby Sparks' record. It's on. Stevie Wonder called Bobby up on the phone to say that some of the most innovative stuff he's heard in years, and Bobby didn't even know how Stevie got his phone number, right? But so Bobby Sparks is on the record. I reached out to my big brother Marcus Miller. He's on the record. Jazz legend Ron Carter is playing the bass. He's on the record. I'm waiting on tracks to come back from the great guitarist Vernon Reed. I got the great guitarist Dean Brown and Bobby Broom and Alan Cato play with Michelle Ndege cello, and Dave Dyson on bass play with Michelle Ndege cello. It's just a mix, and I'm about to record the alto saxophone player Kenny Garrett. There's just so many people, you know. And the thing that's just so awesome is that, you know, I have no budget, right? I have a licensing deal. I don't have like a pocket full of money. I'm not a rich guy. But I'm reaching out to these guys, and people are reaching back and are sharing and donating their talents with me. You know what I mean? And it's truly just mesmerizing. You know, the amount of love that I have received from all these world-renowned and great musicians who could have very simply just said, well, Poogie, no, man, you know, I need this amount of money and this, that, and the other. But guys are looking out and coming through for me. So I'm really, really excited about this record, you know, and it's a labor of love, especially in this day and age of, you know, people have so many entertainment choices, and Netflix, just, my God, just watch, you know, you probably have to spend 3 years just to watch their entire library, right? So my point is, it's just that it's increasingly more difficult to do something like what I'm attempting to do right now than it would have been in, say, 1990, you know, when record business had money and it was still capable of getting a nice budget from even a jazz label, you know.
Let me jump in if I can.
Yeah, hit me.
That's awesome news. Exciting. Can't wait to hear it. So you're going to put out all 22 tracks?
The record company wants to is putting out all 22. It's going to be a double vinyl, double CD. And the songs, you know, the songs that aren't able to fit in the time allotment of the vinyl, or you know, they'll all fit on the CD. But what we plan to do is put the tracks up online. You know what I mean? So if you buy the vinyl, you'll be able to go online and download the stuff that you didn't get, if it, you know what I mean? Because I'm not going to be able to get all 22 songs on 2 sides of vinyl. That's not going to. Yeah, you know what I mean. So, but yeah, you know, we're going for the gusto here, Scott. It's going to be Miller time or a lot of crying. One of those.
Way to make up for a little less time.
Yeah.
So when you're working like that with all these cats, how much direction or input do you give them, or do you just tend to let them do their thing?
When you're working with world-renowned guys, you really don't. You know, I might say, hey, look, I need you to double the melody, or your solo would start here, right? And then, you know, sometimes I'll make suggestions. You know, I was thinking that the guitar part could do this, or I give them, like, I had a great bass player in London named Don Chandler who plays bass with UB40, right? Currently, believe it or not, they're still working. But he's an amazing reggae bass player for like a reggae-ish kind of song. And I play bass very poorly, very badly. You know what I mean? But I made a scratch version on the bass, and I sent it. I said, look, this is in the realm of what I want to do. If you want to do something like what I gave you, go ahead and do it. If you think what I gave you is just nonsense, then completely ignore it and do your own thing. You know, I think the most important thing when working with anybody in the studio is being smart enough to let the people, and trusting enough to let them express themselves, let them be who they are. When you have a musician and you allow him to be who he is, you're going to get a good performance. When you put reins on somebody like guys who play on Broadway, so it's paying good bread, but they got, there's a certain thing they have to do a certain way every time they play the show. You know what I mean? So I mean, it's different type of discipline. But so if you have a guy who's doing something like that, or a guy who comes from a regimented thing, say, hey man, express yourself, just be who you are. They usually go, yes, can't wait to, you know what I mean? So I give as I digress, I give some direction. But when I'm talking to great, Marcus Miller, or Dean Brown, or Vernon Reed, you just want them to play and hope that they like the song. It's probably the most important thing. You don't want somebody playing on something that they don't like, because they're not going to express themselves. This would be like, well, I'm doing this because you're my friend kind of thing. So I'm hoping there's that. I'm doing it because I'm your friend, but I'm also hoping that they heard the song and say, oh yeah, I want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
I don't try to be a traffic cop too much.
I guess it would be pretty awkward though if they gave you something and you were like, I don't think this really fits, but how do I negotiate that?
Well, I'll put it to you this way. I'm working with a young bass player out from Detroit. His name is Brandon Rose, right? And he's an amazing bass player, but he's also an amazing vocalist. So he's singing on the stuff. He's from Detroit, so I'm like, yeah, man, you're gonna be the second coming of Michael Henderson, right? And so we're going back and forth on the length of the verse and so forth and so on. But again, I don't have any ego about my stuff. So if somebody sends me something and it's cool, and I feel it doesn't fit in that particular song that I'm working on, I'll make a song to go with it. I'm not gonna let the track go to waste. If it's somebody trying to put a square peg in a round hole, you just move that square peg to a song that it would fit. But when dealing with so many great musicians, they're like water going into a glass or something. They just take the shape of the song and the stuff. That's the beauty of working with guys, in our age group and a little bit younger. You know what I mean? They just kind of oh, well, this needs this, and then they just do it. You know what I mean? So it's very, very rare that you get something back and you go, I'm not going to be able to use that. It happens, but we're talking about, I don't know, when's the last time you hit the lottery for like 100 mil? You dig what I'm saying?
Yep. Well, let's rewind a little bit, Poogie. We certainly look forward to that record. I mean, I can't wait, and we'll maybe hit it again before we sign off, just to keep it fresh in people's minds. Cool. But I gotta know what it was like, if you can describe it, growing up in your musical household when you were a kid, and being exposed to some of those, musicians that you were exposed to at an early age.
A jazz upbringing is unlike anything else on the planet Earth. So to be able to go and see, people like Ron Carter or Richard Davis or Eddie Gomez or Ornette Coleman or Mary Lou Williams in your living room. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. So, Mary Lou Williams was from Pittsburgh, as my dad, and so she was in New York playing somewhere, and her and my pop were friends. So she came over to the house, and there was a woman by the name of Phyllis Garland. Phyllis Garland, who also was from Pittsburgh, but she was a writer and a critic for Ebony magazine, right? So here we have, socialite, culturalite, black folks in my dad's living room at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, right? And they got in an argument about something, right? Him and Mary Lou got into some musical argument, right? Next thing I know, my dad's coming in and waking me up at like 2 in the morning. Get up! I'm like, what? Right? What? We have to play Take 5 right now. So Take 5 by Dave Brubeck, right? We have to play Take 5 right now. And I went, we do? He said, get up, let's go. So we go out to the living room. And Poogie, this is Mary. Mary, this is Poogie. Poogie, sit down. So he starts playing Take 5. I play Take 5 with my dad, right? And he looks over to Mary and says, see? Right? And I don't know what this, to this day, I don't know what the argument was about, right? And Mary said, okay, okay. And then she sat down at the piano and said, all right, young man, play this. And she started playing the blues or playing something, right? So I joined in and played along, you know what I mean? And then I think it was about music education or something. But anyway, I played with my dad and I played with Mary. And I said, well, it was nice meeting you, Miss Mary. And I went back to bed. But those were typical type of things that, happen, in and around my house in New York City. Like the great bass player who played with Miles Davis, Paul Chambers, lived right down the street. So I used to see Paul all the time. Him and my pop were thick as thieves, or Archie Shepp or Andrew Hill. These are people who were in my house, and jamming with my dad. So I just, as a kid, you just think my dad knows these musicians. They come over and they play, and sometimes I play with them. So now, of course, as an adult, I was very, very fortunate. I was very, very lucky to have all those experiences, and still to this day to be able, the folks who are still here, able to call them friends. Like Ron Carter's like a stepdad to me. You know what I mean? And so it was something else, and in those days too, there were bands, nobody wanted to be a rapper. Everybody was in a band, So I was in a kid band with, great guitar player who lived around the corner from me. His name was Bobby Broom. And he went to music and art, and there was a great keyboard player named Terry Burris who went on to work with Phyllis Hyman and a host load of people, and Chaka Khan and all these different people. We did a talent contest at Music and Art, and at that talent contest, the Weldon Irvine, who was a writer and arranger for Nina Simone, was at the show. He came up to us after the show, and he wrote a play called Young, Gifted, and Broke, right? With play on Young, Gifted, and Black, which he had written the lyrics for Nina Simone, and he had us go. Well, I'm doing this show and I need a kid band. You guys are really good. Come out to Brooklyn, and I want you to read these lines and play and this, that, and the other. So we went out there, we met the director, we read the lines, we all got the job. But on that same day, though, I met Marcus Miller, I met Donald Blackman, I met Denzel Miller, I met Bernard Wright, and
so what year was that, do you think?
This is like 1970, between 77 and 78. You know what I mean? I was going into my last year of high school, so it was probably 77. And but that meeting Weldon literally changed my musical landscape, because he introduced me to all these musicians who I had no idea who they were. I had never heard of, Marcus play or whatever, you know what I mean? And I remember Marcus telling me, he said, yeah, when y'all came out there today, I looked at y'all and I said to myself, oh, they can't play, right? Because, you had, Queens, Bronx, Brooklyn, Manhattan. Each borough had guys, you know what I mean, who were good, but there was no internet. There was no so-and-so, so word of street, word of mouth, word of legend, you know what I mean? But usually the best players playing R&B or funk or jazz or whatever it was, there was legends from Brooklyn, there was legends from Queens, there was legends from the Bronx, but not too many guys knew any good young guys in Manhattan. We were always kind of frowned upon. It's like, oh, you rich socialite fools, you know what I mean? Even though none of us had any money. But anyway, Marcus, we started playing, and Marcus was like, oh, wow, they actually can play. So we did that play for about 2 years. It was an off-Broadway play, but it stayed open for about 2 years. And during that period of time, I learned so much about playing in a pocket and grooving and the importance of grooving. But then too, back in those days, there were places to play. So I lived on 93rd Street. On 94th Street, there was a club called the Cellar. The Cellar was the R&B club. So at the Cellar, Johnny Kemp, before anybody knew who he was, he performed there all the time. Kashif would be in there. Who else? Brass? No, not Brass. Yeah, not Brass Construction. A group called Platinum Hook. But there were a whole bunch of the group changed. A whole bunch of those musicians worked in that club. So I got to play in there a lot. Right, but right down the street, there was another club on 96th Street called McKell's. McKell's was a famous jazz spot, right? So somewhere about my 18th or 19th birthday, I started playing with a trumpet player named Hugh Masekela. Hugh Masekela lived in McKell's. He played there all the time, right? So there would be days when, I don't know how I did this when I was thinking back on it, I would play a set at McKell's. On their break, I would run up to the Cellar and I'd play a set there with Johnny or Melissa Morgan or whoever was there that day, right? On their break, I'd run back to McKell's to play Hugh's second set. At the end of Hugh's second set, I would run back to the Cellar to play the last set there, right? All right. Then after that, I would run uptown to Harlem and then play the after hours joints, right? So there was a place called the Press Club and there was another place called Frank's Loft. So basically, their thing didn't start till about 2:33 in the morning, right? And the windows are blacked out. And it was just mostly just like, hustlers and their girlfriends and stuff. You know what I mean? So, but you go in there and you play top 40, to like, you started at 3, you might play till like 5 in the morning, then I'd run home, try to sleep for a little bit and go off to high school and then sleep through my first 2 classes.
So you're doing 4 gigs in one 24-hour period?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And take everybody to McDonald's at lunchtime. Yeah, I had a pocket full of money for a 17-year-old or whatever I was at the time. But there were places to play in New York. Like now, there's no places for young musicians to learn how to play. So that's why we have so many gospel musicians now, because the black church is the only place where young black kids can learn how to play. There's no more music in schools. There's no more, the club scene for the most part is nothing like what it used to be. You know what I mean? There was a time on 125th Street, you could start on 8th Avenue and walk all the way over to Madison Avenue, and there were places to play. There was live music going on. You know what I mean? But all that stuff is gone. So that's, now all the young black musicians come from the church and they all end up imitating and emulating each other because that's all they know. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And even though what they do is a very, very beautiful thing and a very, very, in the tradition of African-American music, a very original thing that they do, but they don't know anything outside of that box, of that world.
It's slowed innovation.
Yeah.
Is it true you were on Mike Douglas when you were 5?
Yes, sir.
And not in the studio audience?
I was on Mike Douglas when I was 5 with Pearl Bailey.
Wow.
With Pearl Bailey. And I really had a bad experience with Pearl Bailey. So she wanted me to sit on the piano because I was a cute kid, right? She wanted me to sit on the piano while she did her song. And I told her with a straight face, I said, I came here to play my drums at 5, right? And then she said to me that if I didn't sit on the piano, that she would break my hands and I would never play the drums again.
Wow.
Yeah. At which point I started crying, right? And then, that's when she was still married to Louis Belson, right? So Louis comes over and he's apologizing profusely, you know what I mean? And I remember he gave me a tiny little cymbal. I wish I would have kept that cymbal, but he gave me a cymbal and said, Pearl just has her way sometimes, and she didn't mean that. We're so sorry, and you know what I mean? But I did Mike Douglas' show. Actually, I did it twice. I did it that one time, and then we did it again after that. I was also on a TV show. You're old enough to remember. I was on a TV show with oh, what's this guy's name? Wore glasses, Steve something, but it was called Hollywood Palace.
Steve.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The glasses with the
Steve Allen.
Exactly. I was on that show. I was on, remember a TV show called What's My Line?
Yeah.
Did that one. Had a minute when I did TV commercials. I did some Bird's Eye commercials. I did some Hot Wheels commercials.
Wow, like Alan Rippey that used to.
Oh yeah, Rodney Allen Poogie. Yeah. remember that margarine that you would eat the margarine and a crown would appear on your head?
Imperial. Yeah.
Imperial. I did one of those.
Wow.
I did one of those. Yeah.
How'd you get your nickname?
Everybody in my family has either a I-E or a Y kind of sounding nickname. So, we have a Bubby, we have a Snooky, we have a Tookie, we have a Snubby. So I ended up being the Poogie. So that's
you could have just been Charlie.
Well, just the one the one problem that I've always had, Charles was my dad's name. But the one problem I've always had with that name is all the different derivatives of that name. And I had a music teacher when I was in high school. I can't remember his name, but he was a bit of a drag, right? And because, I was the best player in the class, so he would always single me out to get the rest of the class to pay attention. You know what I mean? And so he would always call me Chuck Bell. Chuck Bell. So I became to hate Chuck. And I was like, man, I don't like this guy, Chuck. He's always getting in trouble, And so Chuck, Chucky, Charlie, Carlos. Even though I had a Spanish girlfriend one point when I was young, and she used to call me Carlos, and I was like, oh, she's fine, so that's okay.
Yeah, depends on whose mouth it's coming out of.
Yeah, exactly. Hello, there you go. You know it. You know the deal, Scott. You know the deal.
Yes, indeed. So, who were some of your primary drumming influences, both from the jazz and from maybe from three, but certainly from jazz and funk perspectives, and maybe R&B too?
Well, I've always picked the guys. The majority of the guys I always picked were guys who were somewhere in between all genres. One of the biggest influences on me was Harvey Mason. Mm-hmm. And there was, and I told Harvey this, and he looked at me and he said, "You're like a little bit nuts." But I told him there was a time when I would go to the local record shop. Remember that? The local record shop? And
yes.
Me too. And I would look for new records. And I told Harvey, I said, if I picked up the record and if I didn't see your name on it, even if the guy at the record store said it was good, I didn't buy it. He said, "Are you kidding me, Poogie?" I went, "No, I'm dead serious." I said, if your name was on the record, I didn't care what record it was, I bought it. Because I said if Harvey Mason's on this record, something about it gotta be good. So excuse me. So he was a huge influence on me. Billy Cobham was a massive influence on me. Tony Williams was an influence on me. I guess as the funk drummers would been any of the drummers that played with P-Funk, primarily though Jerome Bailey was a huge influence on me. Steve Ferrone, massive influence on me. Jelly Bean, who's actually a guitar player who played drums with the Time, he was a massive influence on me. And a bunch of drummers from the neighborhood that nobody ever heard of that I watched growing up. There's a guy named Bernie Davis in New York who played with Stevie Winwood for a while, but he was a huge influence on me. There was a guy from the Bronx. His name was Pumpkin. Pumpkin made some of the early hip hop records. He was an amazing drummer. He was a huge influence on me. Buddy Williams, studio drummers, Steve Gadd, Russ Kunkel. I can't think of his name, but the guy who played drums on all the Barry White records, or a lot of them, he was a massive influence on me. Styx Hooper from the Crusaders. And Ndugu Chancellor, Leon Chancellor, played with George Duke all those years. He was a huge influence on me. You know, anybody who, I always appreciate drummers. You got two type of drummers. You got drummers who bring the sound out of the drum. You know what I mean? Have a pretty sound and the drum resonates and the sound comes back out at you. And you have drummers who play the sound back into the drum. You know what I mean? So I've always tried to avoid the guys who did that, the latter, play the drums, sound back into the drum. Steve Gadd, massive influence on me. I love the way Steve Gadd is one of the most musical drummers I've ever heard. Press Roll Playing Fool, Buddy Rich, mad love and appreciation for him. Elvin Jones, Max Roach, Art Blakey, So I mean, I've called my drumming, John Bonham, from just a whole bunch of different places. I don't have musically bigoted ears. I'm willing to listen to whatever. If I have anything that I don't like to listen to, music that is somehow has some kind of ties to something that feels satanic in nature, I don't want to have anything to do with that. I don't want to have anything to do with music that's,
it's negative.
Yeah, just in general. It just has
negative energy. Yeah.
It has a negative connotation just in general. You know what I mean?
So, okay, so you've named a lot of guys. From that, how did you distill it into your own style?
It's real simple. First thing you do is you steal. You copy and you steal. I got the gig with Chaka Khan when I was young because I could play exactly like Steve Ferrone. You know what I mean? And, just like you have so many bass players who sound like Marcus Miller, you have so many horn players who sound like Kenny Garrett. Out of that stealing, though, you start to develop your own personality, So if Steve Ferrone played something and he played 2 hits on his left hand and 3 hits on his right hand, well, then I switched that up and played 2 hits on my right hand and played 3 hits on my left hand. So just doing little tiny things and inserting your own personality will help you capture and create your own sound. The thing you can't be afraid of, though, is what you sound like. And a lot of people are. Undoubtedly you've seen this in your travels. So you have the person who sings in the shower, but then they hear themselves on a $3,000 studio microphone. They go, "Oh my God, that's what I sound like." It's like, yes, that's what you sound like. So being able to embrace your sound, be able to say, okay, this is me. This is what I do. I don't sound like this guy. I don't sound like like that guy, and being okay with that, being acceptant of who and what you are when you're playing music is one of the most important things that any musician could ever learn. Now in this YouTube world we live in, and you go on YouTube and you see all these guys doing 59 back somersaults on their drum set and pirouettes and stuff, and people copying each other and copying each other. So in my day, yeah, you stole and you copied, but you had to show up at a gig and have your own personality. You know what I mean? When everything was said and done. So yeah, so sounding like Steve Ferrone helped me get the gig with Chaka Khan. But once I got the gig, though, I started playing my own stuff. I used that to get my foot in the door. But once I got on the gig, I started playing my own stuff. I started playing the stuff uniquely my own kind of way. So in my generation, it was important to have a sound and to be an individual. A lot of that, like a lot of things, like is going the way of a typewriter. It's like it's okay if you show up and you sound just like the next guy, which is it's an interesting dichotomy that we find ourselves listening in. But as I digress, the thing you have to do is be able to embrace your sound and what it is that you do, and know that it's okay to have your own sound. It's okay to have your own personality. The world we live in now, they're trying to tell you, no, be like the next thing. Don't be an individual. But all great music and all great art has come from people who weren't afraid of expressing themselves about whatever it is they felt. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I mean,
well, and also I would think too. I mean, you don't always want to be completely on the beat. You got to have the feel. Sometimes be behind the beat, and all that good stuff.
you have, yeah, you have you a note, the feeling behind the note is more important than the note itself, and it will never change. That will never change. You play 1,000 notes that don't mean anything. I mean, think about B.B. King. He could play 4 notes and make you go, oh my God. You know what I mean? So it's all
killed.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's all about the feeling behind the note.
So did you get to meet Chaka, or did you just go in and cut the drum parts?
No. I've all through my first tenure with her was when Ain't Nobody was a hit, right? The first time, and then off and on all the way through the 90s, I played in her band off and on. I'd be there for a while, and then she decides she want to do something else. When she get tired of that drummer, she called me back. So. And
she plays a little herself.
Chaka plays some of the most abstract drums and timbale solos I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah. Why does she keep that so bottled up?
I guess you'd have to ask her. I haven't seen her attempt to play the drums or do a timbale solo in a lot of years. But at the rehearsals, every once in a blue moon, she would sit down and play something very, very unique on the drums.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's working with her, Phyllis Hyman, Roberta Flack, Randy Crawford. I've been very, very blessed to have worked with a lot of very, very talented women who sing. Jocelyn Brown, people who really can sing.
Well, Chaka is my all-time favorite, and certainly I'm not alone in that.
She's most people's all-time favorite.
So when you're working with Chaka, though, I mean, does she send chills up your spine being part of that, like she does for most of us out in the audience?
The first rehearsal, way back when the Ain't Nobody was a hit. So we're in the room practicing, playing, working on the song. She's not there. She comes in towards the end of rehearsal. So naturally, the band, this was a young band, we see her, so everybody's energy, kicks into another gear. So we definitely started playing louder, if nothing else. More energy, the volume level increased. Chaka, so if the band was here, Chaka started singing and went like this. Right? And we finished the song, and she stayed up here the entire time. Right? There'd been no way for us to get there. Right? When we finished, she said, yeah, band. You sound pretty good. You sound good. You're a little loud, but you sound good. And I'm thinking to myself, you just came in here and kicked our ass. What, loud? I didn't say that to her, but I said it to myself. It's like, she literally just flew over our heads like Michael Jordan about to like dunking on you, something, And so yeah, she's when you're around the real thing, not somebody imitating or copying. It's a wonder to behold, And she was my first real big wig gig chick. You know what I mean? And so it was a very, very special thing to be able to work with her and to know her, and she'll know her to this day.
Well, I saw her in 77 or 78 at the Roxy on Hollywood Sunset Strip, which I don't know if you've been there before, but it's like a 300-seater. It's very small and intimate. When she screamed, man, talk about blowing the roof off. It was just incredible.
Yeah. She's the closest that we'll ever get to Aretha Franklin again, in my humble estimation. Yep.
Bye.